My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 4 months ago, I watched my coordinator close my 200-page analysis file in front of the entire executive team and declare that my 8 months of work was completely unnecessary. She stood behind the projection screen, announced to the 15 directors present that my exhaustive research on new markets was analysis for analysis' sake, with no practical value, then closed the file while everyone watched in silence. What she really closed was the door to the biggest opportunity our company had seen in years. And when my phone buzzed 20 seconds later with a call from the competition offering me $800,000 annually, I realized she had just handed me the perfect weapon for the most satisfying transformation I could have ever imagined. Before I tell you exactly how her contempt became my sweetest rise, could you take a second to hit that like button and subscribe? Because what I'm about to share will show you how a moment of professional humiliation can become the opportunity of your lifetime in ways that seem impossible, until they happen right in front of you. And trust me, you need to hear every detail of how my unnecessary analysis became the foundation of a multi-million-dollar company. Let me take you to where it all really began, because professional transformation stories always start long before the defining moment. 2 years ago, I joined Enterprise Solutions Parker as a senior market development analyst. The job description sounded exciting: identify growth opportunities, evaluate emerging sectors, develop expansion strategies. What they didn't mention was that the company had been stuck with the same clients and same services for 3 years, and that my predecessor had quit after having all his proposals rejected for 18 consecutive months. My coordinator, Rebecca Martinez, made it clear from day one that she considered strategic analysis an unnecessary luxury. She was one of those people who believed business growth came from doing more of the same, but cheaper and faster. The idea that we might need deep research to understand new markets was completely foreign to her "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" philosophy. But I saw something different in those first weeks. When I reviewed the financial reports from the past 5 years, I found a company that had grown a measly 3% annually, while smaller competitors were expanding at rates of 20% or more. Our clients were loyal, yes, but they were also aging. 70% of our revenue came from companies founded before 1990, and very few of the startups or emerging tech companies even knew our services existed. So I started doing something that was apparently revolutionary in that environment. I began researching why we weren't growing. I spent months analyzing market trends, interviewing potential clients, studying competitors, mapping emerging sectors that could benefit from our services. These weren't superficial weekend analyses. They were deep investigations that included demographic data, financial projections, competitor analysis, feasibility studies, and step-by-step implementation strategies. When I discovered that the financial technology sector was growing 40% annually and that no established consulting firm was adequately serving those startups, I spent 6 weeks researching exactly what services they needed, how much they were willing to pay, and how we could adapt our existing capabilities to serve that market. When I identified that mid-sized e-commerce companies were struggling with scalability issues that perfectly matched our strengths, I dedicated a full month to creating a service framework specifically designed for their needs. These weren't hunches or casual ideas. Every recommendation I made was backed by solid data, profitability analysis, and detailed implementation plans. I was building a complete map of growth opportunities that could transform Enterprise Parker from a stagnant company into a growth powerhouse. Rebecca never understood what I was doing. She'd pass by my desk and see me working with complex spreadsheets, market trend charts, and sector analysis presentations, and I could feel her impatience radiating throughout the office. During our monthly meetings, she'd flip through my progress reports with visible frustration. "Why do you need 40 pages to say we should look for more clients?" she'd ask, tapping her pen against the table. "Market data doesn't pay bills. Real clients do." I tried explaining that I was identifying exactly what types of real clients we could attract, in which sectors, with what specific services, and with what approach strategies. But to Rebecca, any analysis that didn't result in immediate sales calls was a waste of time. What she didn't understand was that I was building the foundation for years of strategic growth instead of just randomly hunting for individual clients. Month after month, my research revealed more specific and lucrative opportunities. I identified that renewable energy companies needed exactly the type of operational consulting we offered, but no established firm was speaking their language. I discovered that biotech companies were willing to pay premium rates for consulting services that understood their unique development cycles. I mapped entire sectors where we had natural competitive advantages, but zero market presence. Each discovery excited me more, because I could see how these new markets could double or triple our revenue within 3 years. But every report I submitted seemed to frustrate Rebecca more. "This is parallel analysis," she'd say, using a phrase she'd apparently invented to describe any research that didn't result in immediate sales. "We need action, not theories." The breaking point came when I completed my most ambitious analysis, a comprehensive 200-page market assessment that identified 8 specific sectors where we could expand, including profitability analysis, entry strategies, implementation timelines, and detailed financial projections. I had spent 8 months working on this project, and it represented the most exhaustive study I had ever conducted. The analysis showed that if we implemented my recommendations over the next 18 months, we could increase our revenue by 150% while diversifying our client base into high-growth sectors. Each sector had its own entry plan, its own success metrics, and its own profitability projections. It wasn't theory. It was a step-by-step manual for completely transforming our company's growth profile, which made what happened next even more devastating. Rebecca scheduled a special presentation for the complete executive team to review what she called Sarah's strategic analysis. She invited all 15 department directors, including our CEO, Michael Parker, for what I assumed would finally be recognition that deep market research was essential for our future growth. Instead, she asked me to load my complete analysis onto the main conference room screen while all the senior leadership watched. Then she began walking through my 8 months of work as if it were an example of what not to do in business consulting. "This is exactly the kind of over-analysis that slows down business decisions," she declared, scrolling through months of careful research. 200 pages of market theories while our competitors are out there closing real deals with real clients. This approach represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how business development works. I felt heat spreading up my neck as 15 executives watched her tear apart work that could have revolutionized our growth strategy. She was presenting my most comprehensive analysis as a cautionary tale about the dangers of thinking too much, instead of doing more. But then she did something that crossed a line I never expected her to cross. She closed my analysis file while continuing to talk about the need for immediate action over infinite analysis. Her cursor moved to the upper right corner of the screen, where the small X seemed giant under the conference room lights. "This entire approach is unnecessary," she announced, with her hand over the close button. "Starting today, we focus on direct revenue-generating activities, not speculative market analysis." And then she clicked close. I watched 8 months of strategic research disappear from the screen, 200 pages of documented growth opportunities that could have generated millions in new revenue, gone in a moment of executive impatience. The silence in the conference room was deafening as everyone processed what had just happened. Rebecca stepped away from the screen with a satisfied expression, clearly expecting me to accept this humiliation and start hunting for individual clients using her preferred methods. But she had made a crucial miscalculation. While she had closed my presentation, she hadn't destroyed the actual research I had compiled, the sectors I had identified, the opportunities I had mapped, the strategies I had developed. All of that existed in my mind and in my personal notes, not just in that presentation file. And apparently, someone else had been paying much closer attention to my work than anyone in that room imagined. My phone started buzzing before Rebecca finished explaining her new direct action strategy. The caller ID showed Herrera Business Innovation, a boutique consulting firm that had been aggressively expanding into emerging technology sectors. I stepped out of the conference room to take the call, my hands still shaking from watching my work get closed in front of the entire executive leadership. "Sarah," said the voice on the other end, "we've been following your work in strategic market analysis, and we want to talk." The conversation that followed would change everything. Herrera had been watching hiring and talent movements in our industry, and they knew exactly who was responsible for the most innovative strategic research in business consulting. They had been planning to approach me for months, but seeing Rebecca publicly dismiss my analysis had convinced them the timing was perfect. "We're prepared to offer you $800,000 annually to join our team as Director of Strategic Development," they said, "plus equity participation and full budget for a research team. We believe deep market analysis is the future of business consulting, and we want you to build that future with us." $800,000, more than triple my current compensation, working for people who valued exactly what Rebecca considered unnecessary analysis. But the most beautiful part of their offer wasn't the money. "We know you developed extraordinary market analysis at Parker," they continued. "We're not asking you to bring proprietary information, but we also know the market opportunities you identified are real and that your research methodology is exactly what we need to scale our operations." I immediately understood what they were suggesting. They weren't asking me to steal data or violate any confidentiality agreements. They were simply recognizing that I had developed a unique understanding of the market landscape that could help them grow exponentially. When I returned to the conference room, Rebecca was still lecturing about the importance of direct revenue generation, while the executives checked their phones or took notes, clearly disconnected from her presentation. She noticed my return and paused her speech. "Do you have questions about our new strategic approach?" I looked around the room at the people I had worked with for 2 years. Then at the blank screen where my analysis had been displayed before being closed. Then back at Rebecca's expectant expression. "Actually," I said, "I have something important to announce." What happened next would become the most satisfying moment of my professional career. But I want to save that for the next part of this story, because the transformation that followed was so perfectly orchestrated by Rebecca's own actions that you need to hear exactly how her contempt for my work created the opportunity that changed my entire life. The beauty of what unfolded wasn't that I planned elaborate revenge against her or the company. The beauty was that by closing my strategic analysis, she had just discarded the one thing that could have transformed Enterprise Parker into a growth powerhouse. She thought she was eliminating unnecessary analysis. What she really eliminated was the roadmap to millions of dollars in new revenue that would take years to rebuild. And when my phone rang with that $800,000 offer, I realized she had just handed me the key to the most elegant professional transformation possible, simply taking my talent where it would be truly valued while she watched everything she had rejected become another company's success. "I resign from Enterprise Solutions Parker, effective immediately," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rush coursing through my system. "I'll be joining Herrera Business Innovation as Director of Strategic Development." The conference room fell into absolute silence. You could hear the air conditioning hum and someone's nervous pen clicking. Rebecca's expression shifted from condescending satisfaction to complete confusion, then to something that looked like genuine panic. "You can't just quit in the middle of an executive presentation," she stammered, clearly thrown by this unexpected turn. "There are exit protocols, transition periods, project documentation." "Actually," I replied, pulling out my phone to show the employment contract I had just received. "My contract allows immediate resignation in cases of non-collaborative work environment or fundamental disagreement with strategic direction. Having my work publicly dismissed and closed in front of executive leadership clearly qualifies." Michael Parker, who had been watching silently from the head of the table, leaned forward. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately before making hasty decisions." But I was done with private discussions and diplomatic solutions. Rebecca had chosen to humiliate me publicly, so she would experience the consequences with the same visibility. "There's nothing to discuss," I said, gathering my laptop and notes from the table. "My decision is final. I'll send formal resignation documentation within the hour." As I walked toward the conference room exit, I could feel 15 pairs of eyes following every step. Some executives looked surprised, others impressed, and some were clearly reconsidering their own professional situations. Rebecca called after me, her voice higher than usual. "You're making a huge mistake. Herrera is a small company without Parker's established prestige. You're throwing away professional stability for a fantasy that strategic analysis is more important than proven results." I stopped at the door and turned to look at her directly. "We'll see which approach proves more valuable long-term." Within 48 hours, I had cleaned out my office, completed all exit interviews, and started my new position at Herrera Business Innovation. Their office was more modern than Parker's, but more importantly, it was filled with energy and enthusiasm for building something revolutionary in the strategic consulting space. I was finally working with people who understood that sustainable business growth required deep research and strategic planning, not just reactive sales activities. But the real validation of my decision came in the following weeks, as I watched the natural consequences of Rebecca's actions unfold with devastating precision. My first project at Herrera was implementing exactly the strategic analysis methodology I had developed at Parker. Using my understanding of the 8 growth sectors I had identified, we began positioning Herrera as the boutique consulting firm that understood the unique needs of emerging technology, renewable energy, and biotech companies. I didn't need to steal clients or violate any confidentiality agreements. I simply applied my market research to help Herrera strategically enter sectors where we had natural advantages but limited competition. The results were immediate and spectacular. Our first new client was a fintech company that had been searching for specialized consulting for months. Using my fintech sector analysis, we could create a service proposal that addressed exactly their unique pain points. The initial contract was $2.3 million over 18 months. The second client was a renewable energy company that needed operational consulting to scale their operations. My energy sector research allowed us to present a growth strategy that was perfectly relevant to their challenges. Contract: $1.8 million. By the end of my first quarter at Herrera, I had helped secure over $8 million in new contracts by applying exactly the strategic analysis methodology that Rebecca had dismissed as unnecessary. Each new client validated the importance of deep market research for identifying growth opportunities. Meanwhile, at Enterprise Solutions Parker, Rebecca was beginning to realize what she had really closed when she destroyed my strategic presentation. I learned about her growing panic through mutual industry contacts. Apparently, she had tried to replicate my market analysis methodology, only to discover she didn't understand the fundamental principles behind strategic research. When she tried to expand into the fintech sector without my detailed analysis, her team made generic proposals that were rejected for not understanding the sector's specific needs. When she attempted to approach renewable energy companies using traditional consulting services, potential clients explained they needed specialization they clearly didn't have. Month after month, the sectors I had identified as the biggest growth opportunities became successes for Herrera, while remaining completely inaccessible to Parker. Rebecca had rejected the map to millions of dollars in new revenue, and now she was watching another company use exactly that map to dominate emerging markets. 6 months after my departure, I received a call that made everything clear about how devastating Rebecca's decision had been. A former Parker colleague wanted to share information he thought I should know. "Michael called an emergency executive team meeting last week," he told me. "Apparently, Herrera has been winning all the big contracts in the sectors you had identified as growth opportunities." Rebecca had to admit in front of all leadership that she doesn't understand why they're having so much success in markets where we can't even get meetings. That conversation revealed everything about why Rebecca's approach had failed so spectacularly. Even faced with evidence that my strategic analysis was driving the competition's success, she couldn't acknowledge she had made a mistake. She was still trying to compete in new markets using traditional methodologies that didn't work for emerging sectors. By the end of my first year at Herrera, we had secured over $25 million in new contracts by applying my strategic analysis methodology. We had not only successfully entered all 8 sectors I had identified, but positioned ourselves as the leading consulting firm for emerging technology companies throughout the region. Herrera had grown from 40 employees to 120 employees in 12 months, and I had been promoted to principal partner with significant equity participation. My unnecessary analysis had become the foundation of the fastest-growing consulting company in our industry. Meanwhile, Enterprise Solutions Parker had experienced its worst year in company history. Without access to new growth markets and facing intensified competition from boutique firms like Herrera, their revenue had decreased 15%, while their operating costs continued rising. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or professional recognition, though both were incredible. The most satisfying part was knowing Rebecca had created this entire situation herself through her stubborn refusal to value what actually drove sustainable business growth. She could have implemented my strategic analysis. She could have used my research to position Parker as a leader in emerging markets. She could have recognized that my methodology was generating valuable insights that could completely transform the company's growth profile. Instead, she had chosen to publicly humiliate me and close work that represented the roadmap to millions of dollars in new revenue, apparently believing her direct action philosophy was more important than actual evidence of what worked in emerging markets. 2 years after my departure, I heard through professional networks that Michael Parker had called an emergency investor meeting to discuss strategic options for the company. Enterprise Parker was facing possible merger, acquisition, or significant restructuring to compete with boutique firms that had captured the fastest-growing markets. According to sources still working there, Rebecca had been demoted from her coordination position and reassigned to an individual consulting role without leadership responsibilities. Her direct action methods had been replaced by a new approach that prioritized exactly the kind of deep strategic analysis she had rejected as unnecessary. 3 years after watching them close my analysis in front of 15 executives, I direct the strategic development department of the fastest-growing consulting firm in our region. Our success is based completely on the principle Rebecca rejected, that sustainable business growth requires deep research, strategic analysis, and long-term planning, not just reactive sales activities. Every day, I work with clients who appreciate exhaustive research, detailed market analysis, and growth strategies based on solid data. Every new contract we secure validates the importance of deeply understanding markets before attempting to compete in them. And every day I remember that the best response to people who underestimate your work is simply proving they're wrong through your success elsewhere. Rebecca thought she was closing unnecessary analysis when she destroyed my strategic presentation. What she really closed was the opportunity to transform Parker into a growth powerhouse using insights that would take years to rebuild. Sometimes the most satisfying transformation is simply allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their own decisions while you build something extraordinary elsewhere. The most elegant revenge isn't planning your enemy's destruction. It's allowing their own ignorance to destroy them while your talent flourishes where it's truly valued. If this story resonated with you, or if anyone has ever dismissed work you knew was valuable, I'd love to read about it in the comments. Sometimes the best therapy for professional humiliation is sharing stories with people who understand what it feels like to have your contributions rejected by people who should know better. And if you enjoyed hearing how closing my analysis became the catalyst for my most successful professional transformation, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about how underestimated talent finds its true value when the right people finally recognize it.